Morbidology is a weekly true crime podcast hosted by me, Emily G. Thompson, author of Unsolved Child Murders, Unsolved Murders, Cults Uncovered, and Mysteries Uncovered.
911 emergency. My son shot my husband. I need an ambulance. He's bleeding.
Each week on Morbidology, I uncover a new true crime case, using investigative research combined with source audio.
I just snatched it from her. I started took it, and it's like I just hit her with it.
Morbidology is a victim-focused podcast that mostly covers cases that aren't widely documented in mainstream media. I also like to take an in-depth look at any systemic failures which had a part to play in the crime.
Do you know why you're here?
For a home invasion gone terribly wrong.
Listen to Morbidology across all podcast platforms.
Hello listeners, and welcome to a bonus episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker Casey, and I recently got together with my good friend Sarah Ferris from Community Podcasts to discuss her seasonal show Conning the Con, where we draw parallels between con artists and cult leaders. This interview is also available as a video interview on YouTube, and you can follow the link in the episode description to watch today. And if you would like to join Sarah and myself at CrimeCon in Glasgow on September 10th, you can find tickets at crimecon.co.uk and use the code CULT at the checkout for 10% off. Or follow the link in the episode description. I hope you enjoyed this bonus episode as much as I did. Here is Sarah Ferris. So hello, Sarah, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Since we connected at CrimeCon in London, I have been so eager for this conversation. I absolutely love all of your work across all of your podcasts, and I'm excited to share it with all of the listeners today. So would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Sarah Ferris. I'm an accidental podcaster, I guess you could say, right? So podcasting's not my background at all, but I kind of fell into it because a story happened and unfolded in front of me to a family member that I just had to tell, and podcasting was the easiest medium to do that in, I guess. And yes, since then, Conning the Con is the name of the first podcast. Since Conning the Con came out, I've sort of connected with lots of different podcasters like yourself, who I actually met for the first time in prison, ironically, when you think about it.
Yeah, smuggling in lots of contraband.
Yeah, that was a really fun night. We went to an immersion theatre experience in London.
Alcatraz was the name of the place that we went to. Some people might have heard of it or seen our pictures. So we were given orange jumpsuits and thrown into jail cells and supplied with lots of alcoholic cocktails, or not alcoholic in your case, because you tried to smuggle in 0% gin.
Yeah, that didn't end up going so well for me, I don't think. I think they sabotaged me a little bit. But that was actually the first time I introduced myself to you when you were in the cell next door to me. So
it's true, yeah. And I think it set the basis for a really beautiful friendship.
Exactly.
So you've mentioned Conning the Con there, and for anyone else who hasn't heard of Conning the Con or your other shows, can you give us a synopsis for all four of them, I believe?
Yes. Some may say I need a podcast making intervention, my husband being one of them. So the first one's called Conning the Con, and that podcast rose out of the embers of my sister's experience dating a serial con man. So she met him on Tinder, swiped right, dated him for 6 months. Then it all kind of went sideways and she discovered his real identity. So that was the first podcast that came out, I think, last year. After that, I connected with the former head of the FBI's active shooter program, Catherine Schweit. People always go, how did you meet Catherine? That's such a weird connection. But we actually met on an audio platform, and I stalked her a little bit on Twitter because I was like, oh my goodness, I just want to do an interview with you. And when we set that up, we actually really gelled and decided, let's make a podcast together. So that's the second podcast, and it's called Stop the Killing. Really gentle title, I know, but it's named the same as her book, which is called Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. And that's what we focus on, a case each week. We tried to make them historical, but unfortunately, we just keep getting newer and newer cases. So I'd love to put that podcast to bed and never have to do another case on that. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the way things are heading at the moment. So yeah, it's all about educating people on what they can do to keep themselves and their families and the community safer, really. So that's number 2. Then, crazy story. So a month after my sister Emma discovered that she had been dating this serial con man, my parents-in-law discovered that they were involved in one of the largest Ponzi schemes in New Zealand. So that ended up being my third podcast, because the victims, there was 81 victims, and there was $16 million that was stolen from these victims over a period of 40 years, which is incredible. That they came to me and said, we've listened to Conning the Con, will you tell our story? I was like, hey, I'd love to tell a story that isn't related to me. But I'll do this one and hope I don't have to do another family related one anytime soon. So that's how Clueless came about. So the title for that one is Clueless, spelled Klooghless, because the con man in the story's name was Barry Clue, which is the only good thing that man ever did, was to give me that brilliant pun for the title. So if you want to look for Clueless, the long con, you need to watch how to spell that, Kloogha. Yeah, so that's my 3 true crime podcasts. And then I also connected with an American sustainability writer and influencer on a little show that I was doing, which was a bit more sort of a comedy-based show. And yeah, we kind of just connected, and I said, my goodness, maybe you should be teaching me how not to crap all over this planet. I'm sure I could get a little bit greener. And so The Guilty Greenie was born, which is a sustainability podcast. So probably still a bit of a true crime, more about my crimes against the planet than anything. So there you go.
There's a whole plethora of content for people to go and access. And as you said before we hit record, although some of the podcasts are seasonal podcasts that have ended, there's stuff that you are adding onto those shows that is kind of in keeping with the theme of the show, but might be from other content creators or might just be from other things that you're getting involved in. So it's like a little update feed as well, like a watch out coming soon feature.
Very much so.
So we're going to be talking about your podcast, Conning the Con, today. After listening to the entire show to be like, is this really in keeping with cult-like methods of control? I can absolutely, without a doubt, say that, yes, confidence people use the same tactics that cult leaders and people in leadership in cult-like groups might use against followers and victims within those environments. And I was thinking, surely there's not a whole episode that I could do with Sarah comparing her sister's experiences and your whole family's experiences to some of the other experiences that we've heard about on the show. But the more I wrote down notes, the more it appeared to be that there is absolutely probably an entire podcast that we could do on the subject. So we're going to be talking about Conning the Con. But before we get into how Emma met the perpetrator, what was your family life like? Was it, sometimes people end up in these situations because there was perhaps trauma or problems, but just paint the picture for listeners on what your childhood was like growing up alongside Emma.
Well, I have to say, we were very, very lucky. We did kind of live in our own little cult of the Roman Catholic Church. We grew up in that, but really happy childhood. I'm one of 6 children. So Emma's actually my youngest sister and I'm the second eldest. So there's quite a gap between us and between. And I have to say, we lived in New Zealand, and as you can imagine, really idyllic, loving family. We had grandparents around. So yeah, no trauma. And I think, maybe that's one of the reasons that we are good victims, because, trust was something that we had innately. We just trusted people because we hadn't had that trust broken, I think. So one of the questions that we asked psychologists that we had on Conning the Con all the way through was particularly that, what makes a good target for conning? And it is often those people that are trusting. And I think that's probably why I thought I had such a great lie detector, and clearly I don't.
And what is Emma's personal circumstances when she comes into contact with this person?
Yeah, so Emma had been married and had 2 young children at the time. She was divorced, I think, for about 2 years before she met Andrew, the con man. And yeah, she was just in a really great space. She's got her own business. She's a qualified physiotherapist. She built up a real sort of brand around her business and was ready to meet someone, had been really kind of waiting to meet the right person and be in a great space. So she would say, and I think she even says it in the podcast, she was really in a great space to meet someone and add someone to her life, because that's what she was looking for. She was in her mid-30s, early 30s, actually, I think at the time.
So perhaps that vulnerability there, or that searching for something in life at that time, may have been a potential target on Emma's back for somebody like Andrew to come along. And the fact that he is utilizing dating apps in that way, a lot of people might be looking for kind of fast love.
Yes.
On dating apps, but people also might be searching and longing for something a bit deeper. You talk a lot in the show about Emma being out of the game and not really knowing where to start in finding potential matches in real life or where to meet new people.
Yeah, and I think that it is hard. That is an accepted way to meet someone, is now online. I mean, I've been married for over 2 decades now. I don't want to age myself, but so I don't, and I didn't have to do that whole dating thing. But she was living in a small town, a really small town, and the potential to meet somebody there that was going to be a lifelong partner was not really a possibility. So the online dating sort of seemed to be the way forward to kind of get into the pool. It is interesting because I think any con artist is basically looking for the utility in a person. And it's not that we shouldn't be looking for love. Everybody deserves to be looking for love. It's just that they can manage to spot it and then weaponize it against you, really.
But there's the potential that Andrew's going through those profiles on Tinder within the radius that he's set up, and he's looking for profiles that look more in line with women that are looking for more long-term relationship.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I mean, I think the other part of it is Emma, had a public profile, essentially. She had a business that was online that was easy enough to Google. You could find a lot out about Emma in one or two clicks.
I didn't even consider that. So when Emma comes across Andrew's profile, she said it was pretty basic.
Yeah.
Nothing there that would raise red flags.
No.
It looked quite wholesome. It looked in keeping with the sorts of interests and hobbies that she had in terms of, outdoor activities. He wasn't being too cocky or overtly narcissistic in his profile. So she didn't no immediate red flags.
No, not for Emma, but for me, there was, so that was probably my first red flag. I'm on the other side of the world, so we would have a Zoom call. And I mean, to be fair, it would have been a red flag for her as well. But because she was in the orbit of the con man, those red flags are squashed a lot quicker than the perspective of somebody on the outside looking in. So one of the first things that raised my hackles was when she said, "Oh, I've met a man. He seems really nice." Totally in the first flushes of getting to know him. And she said, "This is his name, Andrew Tonks." And I said, immediately, I'm off to Google him. So that's exactly what I did. I went, and she goes, "Oh, no, Sarah, you can't." And I went, "Oh, Emma, I literally said, Emma, that's a red flag." And she goes, "Oh, no. I mean, I said the same thing to him, but he said that he'd had his identity stolen. So he had paid a lot of money to actually get all of his profile wiped off the internet." And, I'm immediately just going, no, red flag, whatever. But, it was incremental. That was one thing. It was not like he was moving into the house with her. They were just going to have dinner. She was building a profile of information at that stage. So it wasn't to the point that I was going to go, "Get me his passport. I need to see his ID," or anything like that. And same with her. So it's a slippery slope.
So there's nothing online about Andrew, but there's plenty online about Emma. So whilst you're at home Googling him, he's probably at home Googling her.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know if he ever did, but I mean, if he was sharp, and he was pretty sharp, and he had plenty of bloody time on his hands, it turns out. Yeah, you would, wouldn't you? Yeah. And of course, I should say that he was using a fake name as well. So his last name in real life is Andrew Tonks, but the name that he went by was Andrew Thompson, which brilliantly generic. You put Andrew Thompson into any Google search and you're going to pull up a gazillion of them.
And although you're seeing red flags, he was able to perfectly explain away the reason why he doesn't really have an online presence, which is enough to say satiate Emma at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to imagine interesting to talk to you because you know how people get led into that cult world. I mean, Andrew was a cult of one, essentially. He was just crafting that cult of one. All he needed was for her to believe in him, and that was it. And it's a really slow build of little elements of trust. And they're not just words, they're demonstrations of trust. So he did a really smart thing in terms of his entrepreneurial way he presented himself. He was finger in many pies. So, he would say he had a restaurant business, he had real estate, he had and he was kind of almost like spreading himself so thin, but waiting to see which one would stick. What one was she going to be interested in? Then he was going to narrow it down and hone in on that. But in reality, he was actually going through the motions of buying a restaurant. He was going through the motions of buying a property. He was just doing it all fraudulently. So all of those little elements that she was seeing looked legitimate. And she could see that he was dealing with the banks and all of that kind of thing because he was involving her in that, which was part of that grooming and elements of trust that he would bring on board. He finally worked out what Emma was interested in, and then he just kind of honed in on it.
Oh my goodness. So it's almost like small grains of trust in amongst a whole pile of like bull crap.
Yes.
And because you can verify or corroborate some of those tiny bits of information and back them up with he must be legitimate because I have met his family, or however it plays out, and then everything else is explained away because that some things are true. So the red flags almost then just kind of get pushed to the wayside because you must be ridiculous to be doubting this person. He's presenting me here with truthful information, but only tiny bits.
Yeah. And as those 6 months of dating kind of went on and on, I was pushing back on those things, saying, oh, he sounds too good to be true. We called him a unicorn because he was just so unusually, successful at everything. He was a millionaire and he'd done this and this and this, all these things, all these stories. And I'm like, Emma, he just sounds too good to be true. And then I started calling him, it was around the same time as Dirty John, the Netflix drama, had come out. And I actually called him Dirty Andrew. And I even called him Dirty Andrew to his face because he would get on Skype every now and then when she was on Skype or whatever. And he'd be there and I'd be like, just testing the waters as much as I could. Oh, you're the unicorn. Oh, how are you? I call you Dirty Andrew kind of thing. And he was like, oh, that's funny. Ha, ha, ha. Not a flicker in the eyeballs. Zero like sweat beads or anything coming up. So, from the outside looking in, all of those red flags were there all the time. The whole family kind of felt that. But there were certain moments that you could just see flicked over to, oh, no, of course he's legit. And one of those was when he actually had his mum come and stay with Emma in the house, at Emma's house, for about 3 or 4 days. And, there was so much doubt in the family about this guy that I remember one of my sisters saying at the time, oh, look, he's even wheeling out the fake mother now. That's kind of the level of distrust that you could have from the outside looking in. But to Emma, it was like, and me, I actually, Skyped the woman. I eyeballed her and everything. It was like, well, how can that be? You wouldn't dare bring your mother in if you weren't legit. That's very ballsy. What we then discovered, having talked to the psychologist, is that level of risk. That is what psychopaths like con artists like Andrew live in permanently. They live in that red zone because what you and I would be absolutely, sweating bullets over, that's just another day for them. So yeah, he never let her alone with the mother. So never did she have the opportunity to say, so tell me more about Andrew. But at the same time, the mother could see and knew that he was out of jail for committing fraud and was having a relationship with a woman with 2 young children and still didn't say anything. So, there's certainly some enabling questions that.
Yeah, enabling questions or questions around his manipulation and grooming of his own family to get to the point where she wouldn't dare or even think to say anything, which is another thing all on its own. But I thought it was particularly interesting when he took Emma on their first date in person to a place he said he used to go with family, or was it a place where Emma used to go with family?
Both.
So it had those familial ties, and he's already starting to kind of plant information about his legitimacy and, by talking about his history.
Mm-hmm. All of that. Everything was about his legitimacy. Everything was about the businesses that he'd done and the experience that he had. And that's why now he was buying this restaurant in the middle of Queenstown. And that's why he was over as a consultant working for a trucking company as well. I mean, he just had fingers in so many pies. So I only met him once, and he even showed me the plans to this, architecturally designed plans that he had drawn up for this property that he was purchasing, that he also took Emma to have like a picnic at, and said, this is the property that I'm buying. Or that kind of layer of information, and it just built and built and built and built and built and built. And then without 6 months of never ever putting his foot out of line, then there was no reason to doubt. 6 months is, somebody's going to fall off the rails in 6 months if they're that evil. Surely you can't hide it for that long. Turns out you can.
And that kind of goes back to what you were saying before about how it's not just the words that we use to manipulate Emma, but also the gestures as well. So him taking her to these places and showing her, what his intentions are with buying things, sitting down with you and showing you blueprints when he knows that the family is skeptical of him as an individual, and not being too full on with trying to prove himself, just tiny little bits here and there, and then just kind of taking his foot off the gas and letting you come up with your own assumptions. So again, just more of that manipulation. And it comes, in my mind, back to something that Adam was exploring on the commune when he was talking to somebody about how people with high levels of intelligence, like psychopaths often, or people that show narcissistic traits, they are willing to take risks because their fall is softer. So if Andrew always believed that he could work his way out of a situation if it was to go wrong, then there was no reason for him to, if he could control the conversation between Emma and his mother, there's no reason for him not to use her as a pawn in his further agenda, which is just absolutely terrifying. It makes your skin crawl.
Oh, unbelievable. Totally unbelievable. And I think if you remember, like I said, I was really skeptical of him going into it at the beginning. And when I went and visited New Zealand at Christmas, I met him in person for the first time. And like the family kind of lived near a lake. So we were all going down to the beach. And I put 3 chairs out and then one opposite because I knew he was coming. And he rocked up and I was like, mate, this one's for you. Come and sit down in the hot seat. I've got some questions for you. And I can remember just like testing and testing and testing him because I had so many doubts the whole time, right? So I spent 24 hours with him, and he was talking to Emma then about, that evening he was talking about, going to buy this property, but he couldn't buy the property because the laws in New Zealand, I said to him, you can't buy the property in your name because you're Australian, and there's laws that say you can't buy over a certain amount if you are not a Kiwi. And he said, oh, well, I'll put it in Emma's name then, I guess. And I went, Andrew, and I said, that is a massive red flag right there. So I'm saying this to his face with all of this doubt, and he still managed to have me leave that interaction with him the next day and be like, no, I was wrong about Andrew. He's just salt of the earth, really entrepreneurial, clearly loves Emma kind of guy. Because it's just that good. And one of the things that sticks in my mind, I mean, the psychologist that we have on Conning the Con is just gold. The gems that she was spitting were amazing right throughout the podcast. But one of the ones that sticks with me is this psychological mask that these guys put up, or women if they're female con artists. And it's basically reflecting back to you what you want in the perfect partner, if it's a romance fraud or the finance, again, same thing. And that was one of the things that Emma said afterwards, is when she reflected back, she goes, yeah, he just never, ever rocked the boat. In a normal relationship, it wouldn't be that perfect. I think it's a good lesson to learn.
But it's allowing her to, the love bombing that Emma experienced after their first date, you know, with him rocking up and taking her for nice dinners and really focusing on her and letting her have the space to talk about herself. So, you know, she's not in mother mode. She's not in work mode. She's in Emma mode. And for the first time in a long time, she's having somebody give her all of the attention that she wanted. And that's what she was searching for when she signed up to Tinder. So he's given her that space. You're so right. It feels as though that's exactly what he's doing, you know. And then the love bombing carries on. Usually it turns into, and maybe this comes a little bit later on, usually as I explored with Elgin at my session at CrimeCon, it turns into toxic positivity, where it's like, well, I've taken you out for all these meals and I've bought you all of these things and I've introduced you to my mother and I've done all of these things. So what are you going to do for me now? You know, you're not even going to sign your name so that, you know, we can have this property together. He just doesn't rock the boat. And the love bombing phase usually just doesn't last that long. So she's just riding this high of a new exciting romance for, you know, the honeymoon period lasts a lot longer here than it would do in, I would say, in a typical relationship.
Absolutely. And he promised her exactly what she wanted. She wanted to have a family, you know, like build a life together. And I think that's the thing. You go on to any dating situation and your first job when you're going on a date is to assess whether you've got the same goals. So you're almost giving that information to a predator straight off the bat. And you don't know that he's a predator. There's no kind of face that's got horns on it.
And as things go on, it's really well put together, the actual podcast overall itself. It's very journalistic, documentary style, immersive. You know, you're kind of cutting between conversations with other people. Sophie Muir, the psychologist,
yeah,
that you had on, you know, her explanations at certain points, and then you'd interject with, and this is how I felt at this moment. And it's all really, it's such compelling storytelling. I don't often listen to many shows in that format, and the commune was similar, and I just appreciated it so much. And you never would be able to tell that it was just you sitting there kind of stitching things together.
Podcasting for Dummies 101.
Imagine what you'd be able to do if you had a whole team behind you and a
Yeah, true.
So as the time goes on, it's as you said, explored throughout the episodes, that Andrew is just throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks. And we see this a lot in you know, smaller fringe groups that might have a coercion and control methods in place, you know, new age spirituality, tarot reading, Buddhist aspects, and certain parts of Christianity, but maybe smaller parts like Seventh-day Adventism, where their views on Christianity are different from those in mainstream Christianity. So it sometimes felt like it was one of those situations, you know, if you have enough, if you cover enough ground, something in there is going to, you know, if you meet someone on the street and you're like, hey, do you want to come and join my group? We have discussions around Buddhism. Oh, no, I'm not interested in Buddhism. Oh, we have stuff around spirituality. We have stuff around, you know, if you listed, and eventually you'd get to the point where somebody says, actually, yes, you know what? I am really interested in that. And so Andrew finally hits that with Emma.
Yeah. So Emma was interested in property development, which she'd done previously. Her ex-husband was a builder. They'd built properties together. You know, it wasn't unfamiliar territory at all to her. So that was always going to be her plan, was that she would buy another property and develop it in some way, shape or form. That's what she wanted to do. And, you know, of the options, he pretty quickly worked out that she wasn't a restaurateur, which was one of the options. Wasn't into trucking or freighting. Again, not one of the options, you know, another of the options. And the property was the one that he kind of went, yeah, this is making her sort of, you know, wheels spin. We're having conversations about this. But all the while she's like, well, you know, that's his thing. I'm not involved at all. And, you know, as the family's getting these kind of red flags in the background as well, we're all thinking, oh, well, she's never going to give him any money. She's kind of already signaled that. But what we didn't realize was over that time, he was generally, because we were pushing back at Emma, it was working against us and it was isolating her. So she was stuck in this middle ground of people going, ask him about this, going to ask him, and then she'd get this sort of horrible sort of gaslit answer back, and she'd feel like she was, the narrative was wrong, and we would never understand because that was, we weren't educated enough, or some bollocks that he'd make up. So that's how he kind of stuck on the property, and it got to the point where he found this property that they were going to purchase and develop together. As I said, I'd even seen the plans. And so, 6 months in, the day that she transferred $300,000 to his bank account, the very next morning, she discovered that he was a con man and discovered his real name, his real identity. And the way that happens in the podcast, it's such a sliding doors moment, because actually her friends who had discovered his real identity had discovered it the day before. So, they were thinking he was in the house with her at the time. And they were like, we don't know what this man's capable of. She's in the house with him right now. We cannot spook him. We don't know how safe she is. So they sat on that information and got advice from the police for 24 hours. But it was too late. The money had gone into his bank account by then. So that's when it all starts just getting next level.
Oh, and it really does ramp up after that. I was hoping for the other outcome, but there's a few more episodes to listen to after that. So I was thinking there's absolutely, when people are like, oh, I thought about leaving the group or the cult, and then I thought I'd stick around and see if there would be, and then you're like, no, don't do it, just leave, when you've got this. So at this point, he is going through some of these experiences of buying property and buying real estate, restaurants, all
of that.
He is involved in transportation, so he understands enough about each subject to bring enough credibility to each one. And he's got all of these plans and bank statements and blueprints, and some of them are fraudulent and some of them are real.
Yeah.
And he's got them from other people that he is actually ripping off, in terms of the other businesses that he's involved in. So, Emma's like, no. And then they have like a love fund? The
love fund. Oh yeah. She was like, well, that's weird. You have that. But that was part of his kind of, I'll put money aside and that'll just be our love fund. I mean, God, I forgot about the love fund. It makes me want to vomit in my mouth.
I know. So Emma's like, no, I don't want to be involved. That's your thing. I've got my own savings. I've got my own ideas. And he's like, well, I've put us together this love fund. No pressure for you to get involved. No pressure for you it's just for us to do nice things, when we can go on a nice vacation, buy ourselves nice new things. You can use it whenever you want to, but there's no, so even when she's pushing back and he's like trying other things to make her see that he's willing to go all in.
And, like when you listen to this story, you really have to listen to the podcast to hear the nuances and the layers, because he was made a director in a company. So legitimately, when you Googled his name came up as a newly appointed director in an alcohol company. What you don't know is that he'd fraudulently come into that directorship. He'd completely used stolen money to gain access to that directorship, and forged him his signature as a witness on documents. So he had all these plates spinning that were legit, but they all relied on this fund of money from what Emma basically to prop them all up. And once he got that money, it would like be, oh, now I'm going to be able to get the restaurant going or get the gin company going, get the blah, blah, blah property going. And it all revolved around making sure that he could get the money off her.
The things that were popping up in my mind during this point was that he must have done this before, because, he had nice clothes. He always presented himself well. He had a vehicle that was in line with somebody that, had a bit of money. He would take Emma on nice trips and stuff, and they would go and do extravagant things. So where does this money come from for him to set all of this up in the first place?
Yeah, well, I mean, he was basically robbing Peter to pay Paul, really, because he had originally done, I think, a small amount of money that she'd invested originally, which was the test amount of money. And it was only it wasn't significant compared to what she put in at the end. But that money was what he was recycling back to her and using to rent apartments. That was all flashy, rent a house that was all flashy, rent a new car, blah, blah, blah. So it was all
Oh
just
my goodness.
recycled money that she was paying for it. She just didn't know it.
That's like incredulous, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
like, what else can you do? Like the sheer like ballsiness of his actions. It's like,
I know.
it's like when people in groups get paid to be in certain positions, like, you'll get paid £10 an hour to lead these sessions or to lead this congregation or whatever it looks like, whatever group it is. But then they're also expected to pay 10% of everything they earn. So then they are paying themselves. And then also that money that they're getting paid back from themselves is having 10% taken off of it. So
I know.
he's
crazy.
worked out this system where he's using Emma's money to show her that he has all of this money. What on earth?
The reason that I did the podcast in the first place, and that Emma and I come at the podcast from different angles, I wanted to untangle how my smart, clever sister could have fallen for this. Because before that, I was always like, well, you'd have to be, really naive, or like you say, you'd have to have had some trauma, be really vulnerable. How did you fall for it? But what I didn't understand, and what people cannot possibly understand until they've come face to face with a con artist that is of this caliber, is that they groom. And it's the grooming, like any predator, that is the nuance in a con. The better you are at grooming, the bigger the con.
And there was one point where he shows up with a broken hip. I don't know if you ever was this actually, because I was then thinking about, doesn't he show up in Dirty John with like some kind of is it a broken foot or something like that?
Maybe. Okay, so legit, he had the scar because Emma's a physio, so she knew that he'd literally had a hip. So I think he did have a hip replacement. And when we went back later in the series, as we go back through his history of the lies that were uncovered and go back to, it all sort of spins out and we find out all of this in his past. He had actually, one of the true stories was that he had actually done a lot of wakeboarding in the past. And, as is often the way actually with those people with psychopathic traits, lived on the physical edge as well, in terms of would, smash their body a bit. So I think he legit did have a hip problem, I think.
When he shows up with his broken hip, he might have actually at that time had a broken hip, right, or another time had a broken hip.
Yes, but there is the other nuance to that. The broken hip was also the excuse for why he was physically like he was. So there was always this story of, I used to be in, I'm normally in such amazing shape, but I'm not right now because I've had an injury. But normally I am a champion this and a champion that, and I'm super fit and I'm elite at everything I do and touch. So sorry about this blob of flesh that's in front of you right now, but it's temporary. It wasn't. It was pretty much his resting bitch face, we found out later.
And he had been quite vulnerable with Emma with some information. He opened up to her and said, I do need to tell you a bit about my history. I do have a criminal record. I have spent time in prison. So he comes to her with this information. Do you think he's doing this in case she discovers it? Or do you think he's doing it because he's like, I really want to be open and vulnerable with you so that you think I'm authentic?
Oh, it's a trauma bond, isn't it? It's literally a trauma bond. He did that for his own gain 100%, so he could control the narrative, because he knew, if he got busted in any way, shape or form, don't forget, he'd been arrested, and you won't know this if you haven't listened to it, but he'd been arrested in the same town only a few years before. So he was a known face, a known quantity. So there was every chance that somebody might walk past and go, I know that guy, I've clocked him, whatever. So the whole purpose behind him telling her was so that he could get ahead of the curve and be in charge of that narrative.
Dirty John really ruined Eric Bana for me, because when I was younger and I read The Time Traveler's Wife, and then the film was released, and I was like, oh, Eric Bana and The Time Traveler's Wife. And then he did Dirty John, and now anytime I see him in anything, I'm like, you absolute Horrid
Horror.
man.
Exactly. Yeah.
He played it so well, but
He really did. Yeah.
there are so many things in that series that you're right to call him Dirty Andrew lined up with his MO, apart from, Dirty John never really introduced his family and friends. So that's why I was thinking that the mother was either going to be involved in the con and profiting from it somehow, which maybe she was. I mean, maybe we'll never know. Or that it was a fake mum. So there was just so much going on when you were telling the story that I was like, surely this is going to come to light. But unfortunately, Emma does transfer him the $300,000. And then the next morning she finds out and he's already gone.
Well, no, he's not actually gone. The contact with him is, so it kind of comes to the point where she realizes she's got two options. He's got the money and he would have hung around because that money he needed to then buy the restaurant that he was purchasing, to buy the property that he was purchasing. So he still would have hung around as long as he could. And she realizes at that point that the only way that she's going to get the money back is to play along and pretend that she doesn't know who he is. That was the only way. Like, that's actually what the police said. You can either go through the court option and it could take months and all your money will be gone by then, or you can try and get it back yourself. I mean, great options. She went for option B. And, it was quite she should have got an Oscar for it, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want to give too much away to the listeners because this was the most, like, I went on a run when I was listening to this particular episode with the bank. And I was like, I was out of breath from my run anyway, but I was also like really nervous. And I was like, and Emma was talking about how nervous she was. And I was just like, oh gosh, I don't know if I should be doing these two things at the same time because I can't tell what's got me like more worked up, the run or the episode. So I'm not going to speak too much about this part, but what happens next is he's working out that something is not the same.
Yeah. So we kind of concocted this tale. So after that day at the bank, and I should say that episode, we actually came runner-up in the International Women's Podcast of the Year last year awards because of that episode, because for Cliffhanger Drama was the actual section that it was in, and rightly so, because it is very like, oh my God, which way is this going to fly? You're in the room with a psychopath. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but that's the last time that she ever saw him face to face during this as it unfolded. The rest of the time, all of the contact, not even via phone, was all text or email. And the interesting thing was that he was so invested that he would hang around and put up with what sort of we kind of concocted, which was, look, my family's found out that I've transferred the money and they're not happy. And I think we just need to keep our relationship with not business like at the moment. So can you please give me the money back and we can just work on building our relationship first. And then down the track, we can revisit that. So there was always that carrot dangling for him to come back, but also in the opposite way. He was such a psychopath that he was never going to let go because he knew that there was potential to get more money out of her. So he was willing to just keep going on that. And so we had these endless kind of back and forwards, these emails that, I mean, Emma would send them to me in the middle of the night in London, and then I'd type back these responses to her and she'd send them on, and we were always like, I'm like, one day we're going to get busted. He's going to know that we're on to him. And one time she actually forwarded on an email from me to him directly without deleting the bit that said, send him this now. And we thought, that's it. The gig's up. He's going to know that, you know his identity, and that, Sarah's writing these bloody emails and what have you behind the scenes. So somehow we managed to talk our way out of it. But yeah, it definitely came to crazy town at that stage.
Oh, and there were parts where you're on the phone to Emma and she hears noises in the house, and then you're both like,
oh my God.
And then you're like, Emma, can you tell me if you're okay? Because you're like in a different time zone. You're on the other side of the planet.
I know. It was so funny when we're editing that back. We were like going, why was I saying I'm going to call mum? I mean, why, there's the potential that there's a crazy man outside your house. And I'm like, Emma, I'm going to call mum. I mean, I don't know. She's had 6 kids. I should have just put them in the timeout corner. I don't know what she was going to do. I should have been calling the police, but thankfully it was a very fat cat.
It's something about, going back to where we feel safest, I imagine, just calling for your mum, like when you're really upset and you're like, I need my mum.
Yeah.
Maybe that sort of thing, as your primary caregiver, which is interesting. But Emma must have felt like there was a chance she could be being stalked, that she could be being watched, like the paranoia levels. He doubles down at this point and decides that there is more money here, or more potential for him to further his own agenda somehow. He wants to stay in the area, even though Emma's got a portion of her money back. He wants to stay in the area because he's got other things in the pipeline and other people that he's working on.
Yes. And
he sends Emma this email, and I was just when you said the words, I was absolutely dumbstruck.
The Tonka trilogy.
The Tonka trilogy. Oh my goodness.
I know. Somebody came up to me at CrimeCon actually and said, can I buy the Tonka trilogy? That's like, I don't really think it's a finished work. Yeah. So to explain away his entire life and why Andrew was the way he was. And I think the really crucial part of this whole thing is, why would Andrew hang around at that point? The reason he was hanging around was Emma was the domino. If she fell, all of those other cons that he had going on with money coming in potentially would have fallen. So he couldn't risk that happening. So he had to stop Emma from blowing his whole world up. And that was why he did the Tonka trilogy. It was basically to rewrite history and, right out of the pages of James Bond, but more Johnny English, to be fair. He was, he went deep. He went deep fast. And, Emma and I would wait for these chapters to come through because he was he had nothing more to do than try and keep this con going, that he would spend days sitting at a computer typing this ridiculous, farcical autobiography that was so badly written, 2, just full of plot holes, and 3, just gold for me and Emma. So she would get a chapter through and she'd be dialed straight away, and then she would read them to me and we would just be absolutely gobsmacked.
It's like you needed that at that time, though. Everything had been so stressful and difficult. Emma was heartbroken and questioning everything about herself and her trust and belief, her trust in other people and how she could have got it so wrong, and questioning whether he ever felt anything for her. So you kind of both needed something to
laughter therapy, which he did provide. He definitely provided laughter therapy. But yeah, and I mean, my favorite, I said to Emma the other day, if we were ever to make merch, it would have to be, merchandise for the podcast, it would have to be a t-shirt with the titles of the chapters on it. And my favorite being, and he was never one to skimp on a small chapter title either. I think chapter 9 was the one that always stuck in my mind. Maybe it was chapter 6. God, it's been a while. But either way, I think the chapter title was something like Becoming a Spy? WTF? I wanted to be a businessman. And we were just like, oh my God, are you for real? Who do you think is going to buy this shovel of shit?
With a huge kind of opening statement about how this book is only possible because of his love, Emma. At this point, when I was listening to all of these parts, I was thinking, this reminds me of, Keith Raniere of Nexium, when he would say, I have the highest IQ in the world and I have all of these doctorates and qualifications, and none of this was ever substantiated. And 90% of the time, it turned out that it was probably not entirely true. So it reminded me of somebody that's kind of building on this grandiose version of themselves, and he says that he's involved in international espionage.
Oh my gosh. It was so bad though, like at times, and I don't even think we put all of the stuff in there because it was just like, I can't believe you actually did that. But he did some really, sick things. We had a massacre in Christchurch that happened, and he claimed that he was part of the team that went up there and was involved in that, and you're just thinking, well, you can't, I mean, we know that you're an absolute bullshit artist and you've gone that deep that you've used absolutely horrific experience and people's pain to just build up your world of lies.
Wow.
He's psychopath.
That reminds me of something Shaham said the other day about different types of narcissists. And one of them is communal narcissism, where somebody will use a cause that doesn't directly affect them and take it on as their own, as almost like their hill to die on. So that kind of sounds like what he's doing here. He's taking a situation that's affected a lot of people, not necessarily directly affecting him, and using that to further his own agenda. So there's so many different traits of narcissism coming through. Just the fact that the gaslighting, or even just out of habit, the way that he talks and the way that he flips things, whether it's because that you do have that discussion in the show on whether, with Sophie Muir, you are saying, is it gaslighting or is it habit? Maybe we just will
exactly
never know.
No, exactly, that pathological lying. I mean, he couldn't have lied in bed straight, I think, as one of his ex-girlfriends said.
So at this point in the podcast, no, it doesn't end there. It's not the actual con. It's not the actual, does Emma get her money back, doesn't she? The next part of the podcast is that you and Emma actually hatch a plan to con the con man.
Yeah.
So talk us through sort of how you started to collect information and what your overall plan was.
Well, it all came out of wanting the answers. We were like, okay, so what's actually true and what's not true? And when we started to unpick the lies that all of the stories that he had told us, we found out that there was actually real people behind some of them. So the businesses, for example. And when we discovered that, we kind of just ended up going around behind him and blowing them all up bit by bit. Which was very satisfying, but also, we were like a bit scared, like what's going to happen? Is he going to find out that it's us doing it? The heat was on him at that stage. And that's when he kind of fled the country.
A relief to Emma at that point that he was no longer, she knew that he was no longer in the area. But, you wonder where he's going to go, how he's going to get more money.
We didn't actually know if he'd left the country for a while either. Like, it was all just, we actually were doing our own detective work and finding bits out piecemeal from the police as well. Oh, it was crazy. I can't believe that happened. I've forgotten so much of this, Casey, because I haven't gone back and listened to it since editing it. And
just like when you cook a massive meal and you're like, I'm not hungry now.
No, exactly. Just, I think it took me 9 months to edit it together and birth it. And
oh my goodness.
Just kind of working out how to weave it all together. And then, so just, oh God, just thinking about the things that happened are so unreal.
Him kind of calling you up to ask you why you were getting in touch with some of his businesses. So, that was really tense, those parts of the series. So I don't want to give too much away, because I really do feel like people should go and listen, especially people that do have interest in cults and coercion, because as you said, one-on-one cults exist, and he was cultivating that environment to exploit Emma. And even though we might not think of it as abuse, the gaslighting, the grooming, the financial abuse that took place, this man has the potential to be a cult leader. If he would have used the adeptness that he has to juggle all of these things and weave this many lies and manipulate this many people, if he would have focused his efforts on building a following to do that, he could be, we could be talking about him as the next Keith Raniere.
I know. Don't give me any ideas. One of the interesting things that people did say about him when we went back and talked to people that knew him in the past was just that he could have sold ice to an Eskimo essentially, and he could have actually been really successful in business if he had stayed on the right side of the law, but he just never had.
So without giving away too much to the listeners, do you think there'll be a season 2?
Funny you say that. Well, let me just say that the Tasmanian branch of the Tonka Underground Resistance is currently working overtime, and there's a bit of information coming back to us that he may be soon revisiting the inside of a cell, which will probably be a little bit of an update.
Oh, that's interesting. And how about Emma? How is she today? Like, what was her journey through trying to unpack this experience? I mean, the podcast itself was probably healing in some ways, but is she always going to be living with that self-doubt and that traumatic experience that she'd been through?
Well, I don't think that you can ever not live, like, that's a trauma that stays with you. Like, you think about the intimacy of the trust that's been broken there. Like, it's so deep. Emma's got, she's a really strong person, but she's also like a breathing coach, a wellness sort of expert anyway, in terms of her physiotherapy, and she's very much down a lot of that kind of pathway. So she's got a lot more tools in the toolbox than probably somebody else that has gone through that experience, and does take the time to reflect, unpack, and heal, because it is a trauma that will be with her for life and colours all things from now on.
Have you had many people get in touch with you with their own stories of being conned, either by Andrew or other people?
Well, both. So when the first episode of the podcast came out, I think Tasmania just lit up, and all of these people came out of the woodwork. So when I was putting the podcast out, I thought I had a complete series done, but I ended up having to patch together 3 more episodes, which got slotted in when girlfriends and old business partners came out of the woodwork. So yeah, there was a lot more to unpack there. Every single person that, like you say, this is what the podcast's about. They have a story. Either it might have happened to them, their family, or someone else. It's just so prevalent. And I think the one reason that we did do the podcast, and this is what kept us on track the whole time, was if it would just stop one person from being conned, then it would have been job done. And episode 1 came out, and the emails kind of came in, it happened to me. Thank you so much for telling my story. I'm living in fear. I can't tell that story. Or I've just seen this similar person on Tinder and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, definitely. It felt really scary to put it out there because we didn't know how it was going to be received. But as soon as that happened, we were like, we've done the right thing, because the biggest thing about con artists is the shame is, on the wrong person in the situation. They manage to place all that blame and shame and thing onto the victim. And that actually, because people are living in that shadow, it allows these con artists just to keep working. So the more we can expose their traits, their techniques, the harder it is for them to operate.
I can imagine that it's kind of in keeping with what people that have been victimized by cults and coercion might think and feel. When people that don't understand the situations, say, as you were saying earlier on in the episode, how did you not see it? Or how could you fall victim to this? How could anybody ever be conned? It's the same as like, how could anyone ever join a cult? I would never be, silly enough to join a cult. And it's just not the way that it is. That is just not the reality. And so I think that's why the work that you've done is not only highly entertaining at parts, obviously not referring to Emma's difficult experiences, but more so, the way that you and Emma were able to rally together. It's not only entertaining and great storytelling, but it's also so educational. And it's really important to get those messages out there so that we can try and change the perceptions of the types of people that get conned, that get coerced, because it's just everyday people. It's anybody. Somebody said to me one time, if they catch you at the right time, in the right place, that's it. You have no chance. That is it. Yeah. They've got you. And the minute that somebody said that to me, I was like, that is the truest thing that I've ever heard in terms of recruitment into cults and cult-like groups. And I feel like that's the same here.
Yeah. Perfect storm. It's that psychological mask and looking for that utility. And once they find what your weak point is or what you're needing, and they provide that need, then you're screwed. It was interesting when I did Clueless, the long con, which is the one that I do about the financial fraudster. I have Dr. Shaham Das on that podcast unpacking the traits of that particular kind of fraudster. And in one scene, and I say scene because it feels like a scene that I can visualize, the fraudster is sitting holding the hand of a man dying of terminal cancer, and crying whilst holding this man's hand and saying, "Do not worry, I will look after your wife. She will be provided with." Oh my
goodness.
And all, literally all of these things. And I said to Shaham, I said, would you believe that there was any form of truth in that? And he said, I don't think even the best psychiatrist in the world could have spotted him, and he would not have been being genuine doing it. It's so unbelievable to people because they just operate on such a different level of, well, it's not humanity, it's inhumanity.
As you said at the very, very start of the episode, you grew up in a fulfilled, loving household with plenty of trust, and it's in our nature to trust people. We don't immediately meet people with distrust and wait to be proven differently. We meet people thinking that they have the same intentions that we do. We're communal creatures. That's how we've been able to exist and thrive for so many millennia.
That's right. I mean, it's that default. We do default to trust.
Yep. So there's no way anybody could have ever imagined that Andrew was who he was, especially to the depth as well, because it wasn't even like he was just trying to take a portion of Emma's money and run away with it. That wasn't, it just went wild. It just went wild. So everybody will have to go and listen to it. I mean, I know that you have calls to action on your show in terms of anybody that has experienced this to get in touch with you. So if anybody listening today has had these experiences, how can they get in touch with you to talk about that specifically?
Probably the best way is to give me a direct message on Instagram. My Instagram handle is @Conmunity, CON, because I do love a pun, Conmunity Podcast.
I'll put that in the episode description. And now it's important to ask you to tell the listeners where they can find all of your great work.
Well, you can find wherever you listen to your podcasts, you can find them on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere. So yeah, Conning the Con, Clueless, The Long Con, Stop the Killing, and Guilty Greenie. Go check them out.
Amazing. Great. I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much, Sarah, for agreeing to come and chat with me and to give us a little bit of perspective into confidence people. Maybe some people will reach out and there'll be some more content on this, but I think it's undeniable that the parallels between, the subject matter on my show and the subject matter on your show are maybe one and the same.
I know. I would love to actually have just like an episode where you just give me all of the bits and we just marry them up.
Yeah, I mean, let's not talk too much because your husband might get upset. So podcast number 5 airs next month, dear.
I meant an episode. Listen.
It's called the Convolt, and we're just
that's genius. Genius.
Right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Take care. Bye.
That is the end of this bonus episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod and find me on YouTube @The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of The Cult Vault.